Welcome everyone to the Via Knowledge Hub podcast. I'm your host, Heidi Trost, and I have with me Andrew Hoog. Andrew is the co-founder of Now Secure, and I consider him kind of a developer's security guy, right? Like he's the person you want to talk to if you're like, let's get down to brass tacks and let's just figure this stuff out. So I'm really, really excited to be talking to Andrew today. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much, Heidi. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so let's just dive in. I think you're like the perfect person to, ask some of these really kind of nitty-gritty questions. So Andrew is specifically going to be talking about some of the challenges in terms of security for mobile app development. That's kind of where he lives and breathes. He is an expert on the topic, and he's kind of seen it all, especially with his company Now Secure. And he's also going to share some really great tips and resources so you can take off your headphones, stop listening to the podcast, and you can actually start implementing some of this stuff. So really excited to dive a little bit deeper. So Andrew, curious, when you're thinking about building for highly regulated industries, so national security, fintech, healthcare, what are some of the things you feel like developers don't think about when it comes to, different threats, their attack surface? What are those kind of gotcha moments?
Right. Yeah. So thanks, Heidi. I think that starting out, I would say that a lot of the things that I'll say here will apply for national security, highly regulated healthcare. But really, the great thing about mobile is it started 15, 20 years ago. And we had a chance to kind of rebuild on top of everything that we've learned from desktop apps, all of the kind of the security lessons learned. So we have a really interesting platform where we have hardware with software that's baked directly in. We've got secure enclaves. We've got a lot of great things, like a rich API for building secure apps. So I'm really excited because I think that in the end, people are in a much better place to build a secure mobile app than other types of applications. And what we really have to do is just kind of shift our thinking and then leverage everything that we have available to us. I think one of the biggest gotchas for developers is that people think that, or developers in particular, I think that Apple and Google scan our apps and look for security and privacy issues. And the reality of it is they actually don't do that. There are some basic guidelines that you have to follow. There are some obvious issues, things like malware and things of that sort. But by and large, Apple and Google don't scan the apps at that level. And part of the reason is that 2/3 of the apps would probably have to disappear from the store. So sadly, we've been testing for about 15 years, and we still see really significant security and privacy issue in mobile apps. So I think it's this, hey, amazing marketing from Apple and Google. We don't hear a lot about mobile attacks because a lot of times the things that go wrong in mobile, it starts in mobile and then attackers want to move laterally into your network. So let's go do credential harvesting on mobile. Just because you are leaking all of this sensitive data doesn't mean that somebody attacked your mobile app or your mobile backend. They use those credentials then to move laterally. So between like the marketing of Apple and Google, between this notion of like, we don't see a lot of this in the news where like this mobile app was breached, people, I wouldn't say have been complacent. They're just not aware of the risks. Now, if we back up for a moment and think about mobile devices, how large is the attack surface? It is significantly larger than a desktop app or a mobile app. Why? I'm sorry, a desktop or a web app, because how many sensors do these things have? It's an enormous amount, right? How you're holding your phone, where you're currently located, what things are on the network around you. And so the risk of like losing sensitive data, the risk of profiling the network around you, the amount of data that's accessible on these devices is significantly higher. And so people tend to overlook it. And I get it. Not just is it like Apple and Google are scanning it so we think we're okay. Security is hard. And I came from a development background. I got into forensics and security about 15 years ago. I've written 2 books on the topic. I have a number of patents, so I consider myself quasi an expert in the space. And even when I'm still coding, which I do almost on a daily basis, security is still those areas where like, what is this problem? How does it work? And you know what? I'm on a deadline and I need to ship this feature. And so all of these things tend to get in the way and make it really challenging for developers. The good news is in mobile, there's a really great ways for you to secure the app. And you really just have to kind of think through that threat model and be aware of what the APIs and the advantages that you have, and then kind of continuously test those to make sure you don't have any issues.
Yeah, that's funny. You kind of started off, I was like, oh, like the plot twist, it's going to be so much easier because, they're actually more secure, right? But then, as you kept on talking, it's really interesting that you brought up the fact, like, you're kind of like going in like the side door, right? Like it's almost like mobile apps are a vector to get
Yes.
a means to an end, right? But then you also brought up the fact that there's so much personal data gathered from mobile apps, that it's almost like, it's surprising that you don't hear more about, different breaches happening, considering like they're the
Yep.
treasure trove of information that they
Yep.
gather.
Well, Heidi, on that point, like one, that's been challenging for us, right? We entered into this space almost 15 years ago. We really started out in mobile forensics, which is where I initially wrote my books and then expanded it. But what I found as an expert witness and testifying is that I would perform forensics on a device, and then I would find all of this sensitive data on the device, and I was shocked. Like, I needed to find this for a particular case, and I ended up finding your social security number, your bank account, your usernames, and your passwords. And I was like, wait a minute, what is going on here? So what we realized 12, 13 years ago was that there's a significant risk going on with these mobile apps, in part because these devices are locked down. Like, one of the things that I have to say I hate the most as a security researcher and a developer about mobile apps, mobile devices, is that we cannot get root on these devices like we can on a server or anything of that sort. So we're not able to inspect what's going on. The problem is when we get attacked, right? When threat actors attack us and they get privilege on these devices, we have zero visibility and they have all the advantage. So we run into this really, really hard problem where an enormous amount of the research and development we do is actually trying to maintain persistence on these devices so we can do the low-level inspection, find those vulnerabilities, and help developers fix them before they ever get exploited, by attackers. And so, it's this really kind of challenging space. One of the things that we've done, because as we talked about, a lot of the attribution for attacks doesn't happen through the mobile app. I think it starts in a mobile app or device, and then it moves laterally. We have a couple of interesting resources on our website. One of them is called our mobile breach tracker. And while you don't hear about it, like we just heard about Red Hat, or we heard about the Collins that shut down all of the airports, there is actually a fair amount going on in mobile apps. We'll see CISA alerts come out. We'll see different attacks and breaches that occurred. So later on, or in the resources here, we could post out our mobile breach tracker, but it's a really great way to stay up on, what are some of the issues that are going out, and to drive awareness into your team, into your management, that no, there are risks here. We need to be investing in security.
Yeah, and also follow Andrew on LinkedIn because he posts a lot about this stuff. I've been learning a lot just following you the past couple months. So really, really interesting stuff.
So there's a couple things that developers could think about here. So first of all, as I mentioned, mobile apps have a lot of things that we can do to secure them in the platform, right? So things like biometrics and Face ID, it's like, these are fantastic technologies. And you need to implement them properly, but they really go a long way. One of the areas that gets overlooked, and this happens at a scale that most people don't realize, is about, I want to say, 60 to 70% of mobile apps are actually third-party software. So not dissimilar to what happens in web apps, where we use NPM. You guys probably saw the recent attacks against NPM, but software developers use a lot of third-party SDKs. And what happens is that the testing techniques, if people test mobile apps, and that's a big if, we see maybe 60 to 70% of the market really doesn't test the mobile apps that they're building or the apps they're using.
Doesn't perform security tests? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. 60 to 70% are probably not doing it. Or what they're doing is they're using traditional web testing techniques. So they're like, well, we've got, check marks or some of the other ones, and we're just going to go use the same scanning technology. And those folks are like, hey, we support Swift, we support Kotlin, and and all these other languages. But the reality of it is They don't really support them that well, but just as important, those third-party SDKs that make up 60 to 70% of your application, they're not getting tested in those techniques. And so what happens is a fair number of the issues that we find end up being in these third-party SDKs. Now, some of it is in the app developers app. A lot of it is in the third party. Now, when you're developing for national security, you really have to think about threat actors. So, for example, and I wrote about this on my personal blog. I'll flip over there in a minute, maybe, and just show this to you. But there was there's been a number of SDKs that you can trace back to either China, Russia, or other countries, where the SDKs become popular. Lots of developers start using them, and then they'll change something in the code. One of the ones that's really out there in the public and people can go research it, it's called Pushwoosh. So Pushwoosh, and I'm going to flip over to my personal website. I write about these things on just my personal website, andrewhoog.com. It was a really popular SDK. I've got a little video that goes with it. And what happened was it was actually a company based out of Russia. And what they did, and we're seeing this more and more also with like companies out of China, is they may start in Moscow or some other place, and then they'll reincorporate here in the United States. They'll become popular, and then behind the scenes, they'll kind of try to hide that. So this one was called Pushwoosh. And if you read the full article here, it's like a spy versus spy game. Like they're pulling in LinkedIn pictures, they're creating fake entities, they set up a corporate address at a salesperson's house. And what happened was, as soon as they became super popular, they started then exfilling data, sensitive data. And I go through this blog and I walk exactly through the different types of iOS and Android data that they capture. But what was interesting is they ended up finding this in Department of Defense, federal civilian, law enforcement, and more applications. So they really, in addition to thousands and thousands of applications, if you think about how effective SDKs are, if you can get a popular SDK, which means it works and it's free, like that's developer catnip. It's it's free, it has good documentation, like people are going to sign up. And so they checked those boxes. And if you're in, call it 1,000 apps, and each one of those apps has 100,000 or 1 million installs, right? Which is not a lot for these types of apps. You're literally talking typically of billions of endpoints that you can impact. And if you think about from a national security standpoint, this is casting an enormous net. And all they have to do is put out interesting software. I did a write-up recently where I looked at the DeepSeek iOS app. We did a pretty extensive write-up on this. And so you can read all about it. But we found multiple security issues. Only some of them did we share publicly, but they were sending unencrypted data. They were using triple DES for encryption. They were using insecure data storage, and there was some really advanced and interesting fingerprinting going on, as well as all the data that was going to China and PRC controlled. So again, a very interesting strategy for kind of nation state is great software, get developers to incorporate it. Most people are skipping this in their testing regime, and it just flies under the radar, and then obviously poses a significant risk to national security.
Yeah. How do you vet these, these things?
Yeah.
Like you said, it's like catnip for developers, but you know, how do you prevent it? And then, what are the best practices to, ensure, because maybe it's not something that is problematic when you first use it, but like you said, there's kind of like a bait and switch going on.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've seen that with a number of Chinese SDKs as well. So, I'm a developer. I'm like as you mentioned earlier, like it's like, look, show, don't tell, just like get right to things. And so I'm a little cautious about saying like, well, this is what we do. But honestly, we're experts in this space. This is what we focused on. We feel committed to helping U.S. companies and the government. So, the way that you do this testing is a couple of things. First of all, you do static binary analysis. It's great if you want to go scan it with check marks or Veracode or anything else. They'll find a little bit, and mostly it's going to be noise, right? I think a lot of developers know there's a very significant signal to noise ratio issue with these tools, right? Here's 1,000 problems, and maybe one of them matter. But that's fine. Maybe it's corporate policy, go scan it. Importantly, you need to do what we call as a static binary analysis. So what is that? Take the actual bundled binary that's going to ship and reverse engineer it. Why? We get to see everything that gets bundled into that application, and it's exactly what your attackers are going to do when they're going to probe for weaknesses. Like any new modern language, the build change for mobile apps are fairly complicated. And so you could say like, oh, hey, I've got all this code here, but when you actually do the build, it pulls from NPM here and it does a dynamic pull here and something gets put in here from Maven or CocoaPods or whatever. And so it's very complicated. And so, looking at your source code doesn't really tell the end story. So go look at that binary, reverse engineer it.
My next question was, how do you suggest we do this, Andrew?
Yeah. So we have two really, really cool projects, open source projects, where we hired the founders of these projects over a decade ago. We said, look, you're doing amazing work. Keep contributing to the open source community. And then we're going to purpose build some of this into our platform, our Noskir platform. So Radare is a reverse engineering framework, open source. Pancake, he goes by Pancake. His real name is Sergi. He lives in Spain. Has just a wonderful tool here, puts on a yearly conference, and here's how you can effectively reverse engineer applications and look at everything that's going on. In addition to looking at the binary, reversing it, looking at all the code, looking for hard-coded encryption keys and things of that sort, you need to run the app, and importantly, you need to run the app on real devices, because when a mobile app runs, it does things differently than if you're just looking at the code. So dynamic analysis, like we all know this. The problem, of course, is running mobile apps on real devices is a hard problem, and we talked about that earlier, getting root on these devices. So another just fantastic project, open source project called Frida. Ula lives in Norway, started this project, and you basically do dynamic instrumentation of binaries. So think of it this way. You take your application, we're going to instrument it with Frida, and we're going to effectively create a tunnel where we can control that application through a bridge, and we can instrument, as an example, like anytime somebody makes a function call, show me all the parameters. Or I want to hook low-level reads and writes at a kernel level. So if somebody's got a malware attack and they're going to do a dropper and drop some sort of payload, and then they're going to delete it to hide their tracks, Frida can actually detect all of these things. To get back to I got kind of nerded out and excited about the tech. Like, you can do a lot of this literally on your own. Like, you can literally come out here, do a pip install on Frida tools. There's awesome docs. There's amazing tutorials. We speak at Black Hat, and you could literally go do this open source, and not just test mobile apps. You could test desktop apps or anything else. But of course, time is important. And expertise is important. So when you go to our Noskir platform, all of the testing that we do, the static testing, the binary testing, all of that incorporates this, the technologies I'm talking about, plus a whole host of other testing, and then built into an enterprise platform. So that's kind of the quick rundown. But these are super cool tools that you could literally go out there and just check out right now.
Yeah, this is so interesting. It's also super interesting that there are, it makes sense, but it's interesting that there are, there are purpose-built tools, for these particular problems because of, the particular challenges that you described with mobile apps.
Yeah, you have to, because, and this is the mistake that I think some people have made, mobile is a distinctly different platform. Mobile is not like a Linux server. Mobile is not like your desktop. It has an entirely different runtime hardware. It has an entirely different threat model, as we've already talked about. It has a different set of frameworks and foundational software, different way that we interact, different sensors. So, to think, well, I'm just going to apply standard web or API testing to mobile apps, it just doesn't work. And that's why we're seeing 80 to 90% of the apps that we scan from the public stores have issues.
Can you share what you see to be like the biggest issues? You have this amazing resource, and folks can even put their own. Is it something that pulls apps automatically, or do you have to submit your app to it?
Right. So one of the things that I've kind of touched on, and so it's important for people to think about this, is attackers are going to do this. And unlike your web app, where in a web app, you're going to write your code, you're going to stick it on a server, you're going to put it behind a firewall, you're going to stick a WAF in front of it, you're going to put logging. Okay, that's awesome. What do you do with your mobile app? You push it to a public store. And attackers are going to download that entire binary, just like we said that we would do to test it. And they're going to reverse it, and they're going to probe it, and they're going to find weaknesses. And so some people in the past have gotten really upset. I can't believe you've tested our app. Well, these are publicly on the stores, and we help really, really large companies not only secure the apps that they build, but importantly, the apps that they use. So we support a lot of DoD and federal civilian and law enforcement. And if you think about it, we've got soldiers overseas, hopefully, fighting overseas or OCONUS or just in some sort of denied area. What sort of application can they use for communications that's safe? Like the last thing that we want is to have, somebody overseas and to have a mobile app that's leaking out secure communications, or secure in air quotes. We found applications that, because of the privacy risks, even if you're trying to like blend in a foreign country, it will leak out, let's say, your contacts and IMEI and other information that would quickly identify you as a US person. So we, in the end, we test apps that people use. And because we do that for large government agencies and large enterprises, we end up testing most of the apps in the App and Play Store. What we found is that we could start to put information that for us is routine and boring because we have the tools to go find it. And we could start putting information out just to inform the general public, not about risks, but think about these as facts about a mobile app. And we've got thousands of them that we put out here on this new service we called Mobile App Risk Checker. So it's called MARC. And you can come out here and search for different apps, iOS or Android. I'll just take this first one as a real quick example. And
like, and just for folks listening, this is on the Now Secure website. So
sorry, I forgot about that, Heidi. Yeah, nowsecure.com. And if you just Google or DuckDuckGo, just Now Secure space MARC, MARC, you'll find this. And so this is just a random app. You could just hit random and search for the next one. And so we'll give some basic information about it, but we'll also look at, permissions, like, hey, what permissions exist? We have some competitors in the space that consider permissions a security vulnerability. They're not. Permissions is a fact. Now, you could decide whether that's a risk or not, and then decide maybe it is a security issue. But here we're just letting you know, like, hey, this app, and it's a coupon app, okay, is requesting the device, your camera and your calendar events, and et cetera. So like, if I'm thinking, well, I get the camera, right? I got to go scan something, but I'm not so sure I want to give you access to my calendar. Just something good to know about. We're also looking at like privacy declarations. So both iOS and Android have recognized that privacy is a significant issue, and that they themselves and then the consumers, their customers, ultimately bear that risk. So they've increasingly put on requirements in order to ship in the store that says you have to declare what sort of sensitive data you're using and why. But a lot of mobile app developers are forgetting to do this. So these privacy declarations are really helpful to know, like, are they missing? As a developer, you might say, oh my gosh, I didn't have to do this in the past. We're missing our iOS privacy manifest. We're not declaring the API types that we're using. And so I need to go get those in there, because eventually Apple or Google will say, hey, we're not going to push your latest version of the app. It also is a good proxy for you to gauge, all right, is this developer really serious about security? Or are they kind of on top of it? I'll touch on these other ones real briefly. We'll look at sensitive data collection. So you can see what sort of sensitive data they declare that they're tracking. We'll also, and this is super cool, because we do dynamic analysis, we're going to show network connections. So observed connections. So you can see here, this app is talking to Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. And you can see the locations of these are in Chicago, Cupertino, Dublin, et cetera. And then the last one that we put out there is whether or not we detect any sort of AI libraries, SDKs, things of that sort. And this is increasingly important because AI governance is a huge issue. Maybe you don't want your sensitive data trained, or as you touched on at the very beginning, Heidi, like PII and PHI, like that getting scooped up by AI, by the wrong models. We talked earlier about DeepSeek. It can be a real security or national security issue. And we found is that since we started detecting AI usage back in November of last year, within the first 2 to 3 months, over 30% of the apps now are bundling some type of AI into it. So the growth has been, nearly exponential in terms of AI usage. Most people don't realize it. These typically are coming through third-party SDKs. And so as we talked about earlier on, you may have an SDK. You may have specifically said as an app developer, we don't do any AI. Maybe you develop apps for the Department of Defense and you've attested to them, we don't use AI. And then you have a third-party library that's actually scooping up your customer, DoD's data, and putting it into and training an AI model. Like that can tank a company. And so what's cool is, while you get that and a million more things here inside Now Secure platform, we have put a big chunk of that data out here accessible under the MARC app. and we're going to increasingly populate more and more apps out there. And it's just a cool way to kind of educate folks, what sort of risks are going out there, and give you a peek into a little bit of what's kind of behind all that.
Yeah, it's like a little like a checkup, right? Like
Yeah.
the different apps out there. Super super interesting, and a great resource. I really encourage folks to check it out. Check out your own apps and the apps that you use. Super interesting.
Yeah. Thank you.
What's the one thing that I can do tomorrow, right? We're developing these apps. What's the one thing, like what's the one takeaway when you say, okay, you're going to take off your headphones, you're going to stop listening to this podcast? What should folks go do now?
I'll kind of put this in two ways. One, I'll put on my peer developer free software nerd hat. But I would say, like, we'll go scan your app. I'll probably get in trouble for saying this. Like, we'll just go scan your app for you, right? Like, if you want to go out there and say, like, look, I'm not going to buy Now Secure. I don't know if now, but I really want to just know, like, give me a quick baseline and let us know, am I red, yellow, or green? Like, we have a little grading scale, right? A through F or whatever. Reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn, hit us up on our website, and just say, hey, I'm super interested. Could you pull this app from the store and let us know?
What percentage of developers do you think just do not know about the vulnerabilities and are just oblivious to some of the stuff that's happening, and will be surprised when they get that red, that red circle?
Yeah, I think it's a lot, to be honest. We have something called Now Secure Academy it's free, like 50 plus of the courses. There's no charge whatsoever. And you can come out here and just start learning about these particular issues, in what do they mean. Some of them are like short and sweet. Some of them are quite in depth. Some of them have our researchers like Ula or Pancake on there talking about, again, the technologies and how to use them. So, you could go out there and kind of get educated a little bit. Now, if you're super curious yourself and you're like, look, I don't want to reach out. And again, you can reach out to me. Like, I'm the co-founder, I'm a developer and a security guy. It's not like it's not a heavy sales thing or anything. But if you're like, hey, I can't do that, or I don't want to do that, you can also go out, as I mentioned earlier, and on these different tools, literally you could be up and running in a couple of minutes. You could instrument your application with Frida. As an example, you could very quickly go out there and say, like, hey, I'm super curious about all the data that sits inside encrypted TLS tunnels. So this is a big issue when you think about third-party SDKs. I'll pick on Crashlytics because it's Google and they're not doing anything bad or wrong. But it's like, okay, Crashlytics, it's all over TLS. It's not technically a security issue, but what are they sending? And you need to understand what is being sent, not only to do your privacy declarations, but if you're building for national security, it's important to know, like, this data is really important and where did it get sent?
Right. Well, that's a compliance issue, right? Like, it wouldn't be it would be any sort of compliance. You need to be knowing where your data is going.
Exactly. Yeah. So you could go out there and just say, look, you're going to do this right inside your IDE. And at this day and age, and I'm sure most of the devs are tinkering, like, Claude Code is amazing. You can use ChatGPT, you can use other models. I use LM Studio, and you can use some of like the foundational models. And I don't mean to plug Claude Code, overly plug it. But what I have found is that it has the context of your development environment, but importantly, it just thinks with the Unix philosophy, using tools built in. You can feed other tools to it, and you can literally say to Claude, like, hey, I really want to test this app. And look for data transmissions inside TLS from third-party SDKs, and I want to use Frida. And you pointed to some resources, and you could work through Claude. Now, we have some great examples and videos and open source tools that will help you do that. But it's pretty amazing. Like, using Claude these days, there's a lot of things that you could do. You're going to do it manually. It's not repeatable. It's not a SOC 2 with an audit and single sign, all the things that we'll do with Jira integration or whatever. But it'll allow you to do some cool stuff.
Been looking through your website. I see echoes of myself as a security practitioner.
Nice.
Just like some of the things that like you think about, and you think about, oh, I don't want to go to a corporate site because it's tracking all these things. Like, it's like literally the same exact things that go through my head. So it's just very refreshing. Or when we were talking about using Chrome,
Oh yeah, like, won't do it, right? No, I think that's cool. And I did see that hiding your background is like, UX from a security standpoint. And I think that's what people don't realize. You hear this all the time. And I recently, I'm on the board of directors at Now Secure, but I'm on the board of trustees at St. Louis University, where I graduated way back when. And People don't realize how critical it is to embed security into the culture of an organization. And you have to lead from the top. But here's a little secret. A lot of people that sit in the boardroom or the C-suite, they don't understand what you developer, you security plus UX, which is an awesome combo. Like, they don't understand your world. And so the ability to kind of articulate that, to stress the importance of security and governance from the top level. Like, when I was a developer and people would talk to me about like governance, I would just like, my eyes would glaze. I don't even know what you're talking about.
Governance is one of those words that you're just like, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's just this nebulous thing that people throw around. But what happens in the end is like, you have to be able to say, I'm spending time on these things. The developer, the security person, maybe you feel like you're in the engine room, but you're the only person that truly can make the case and saying, hey, folks, this is a problem. We're developing for national security. We have 47 SDKs. They're being updated constantly. We know that nation states are hiding who they are and whatnot. And we may be in a position where we've unwittingly aided in the collection of sensitive data. And good companies that have good governance and set the right culture from the top, from the board to the CEO throughout the organization, should be empowering you. And you should feel that you need to do that you must do that, and that you can, share that from up your organization. And, not all organizations, right? Humans are messy. We don't mostly operate like that. That's an ideal. But I would say you're going to find somebody, whether it's your direct manager or higher up, send them the MAR's Now Secure Mark thing, the mobile app risk tracker. Why? Because they probably have an application that they use every day or their family uses, or that your company uses to do business. And they're going to go out there and they're going to look at it and they're like, you know what? We expect and require those apps to be secure. So do our customers, right? And you can kind of lead from where you're at. And I think that's really exciting.
Well, I think one of the things that you said earlier that really stuck with me is, because I was thinking like, why? Why does it matter? Why should developers care? But you said something really important. If there is a breach, if it is found out that your mobile app is sending out sensitive data, whether you're working in national security, whether you're working in, finance or whatever, that is something, that is under your purview and is something that you could potentially help prevent.
Absolutely.
And like you said, It could tank a company if that ends up happening. Like that, you could
absolutely. And it will certainly harm your customer, right? Whether that's a consumer, whether that's that's a government agency, and none of us want that. Look, what do we want as developers? We want to build things that people find useful. We all want to do that. Mobile's capable of doing that. You need to do static and dynamic testing. It needs to be bespoke for mobile. You can go hack some really cool stuff with Frida and Radare and using some like Claude code and go figure it out. You could shoot me a quick note and I'll give you a quick smoke test against your app. But if you're not scanning, or if you're using traditional web technologies, you're going to be missing the threats and the risks. And certainly if you're in the national security or highly regulated spaces, it's not only just not acceptable, it's going to be a regulatory and a legal issue, and eventually it's going to come back. And as a developer, you'd feel horrible, right? Because it's like that's not what I'm here for. Like I'm here to make something that helps people, doesn't hurt people. And so hopefully there's a couple of concrete takeaways, and go check out our sites and our resources, and my connect with me on LinkedIn, and be happy to answer any questions or help support folks that have questions.
Thanks, Andrew. This has been so helpful, so insightful, and really appreciate you being so willing to like directly connect with folks. And obviously there's a wealth of free resources, but you're also available to folks, and that means a lot too. So
awesome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Heidi.
Thanks for listening to the VIA Knowledge Hub podcast. If you know someone who might like this episode, we would love for you to share it. And if you're building for the DoD, you probably wrestled with access challenges, and we've totally been there. See how VIA solved for it, and you can even test out VIA's Zero Trust Fabric free at solvewithvia.com/ZTF-platform.